black, could have been brown. It was dark. And I'm sitting there, and when that face came into focus, monster just came in my head. It was like stepping out into a vacuum. It was dead quiet. There was zero, there was no crickets, there was no frogs, there was nothing. We get back over there that morning at like 8 o'clock. Kid you not, there was a tire track driven through the middle of that track we found. Like, if that thing had wanted to hurt me, there's no way that I would be sitting here telling my story, because that little door that it was looking at me through would not have stopped this thing. It was hunched down looking in, so the top of its head was like right at the top of that door. And the dog would stop. Finally, he gets up, and he said he went around to the top of the steps and looked down, and he sees this dog man with his one arm and half its head coming through the dog door. My name's Robbie Rains. 50 years old. I've been a police officer for about 30 years now. I do a little bit of everything. I do woodworking, make knives, wrote a couple books, enjoy going out and looking for the things that go bump in the night. Got 2 kids. I got a son who will be 26 this year, and my daughter will be 22. They don't live at home anymore, so I've got time to go out and kind of sow my wild oats looking for Bigfoot and Dogman and whatever else I can find. And I'm a school resource officer at a elementary school. 82, 83, somewhere around there. It's hard to narrow down the exact. It was around the time that my brother was either born or had just been born. He was born in 83, so I can't remember if he was born or if it was right before he was born. So right there in that time frame. And I live in South Carolina, if I didn't mention that before. So back then, people used to sit on the front porch and talk and just have those summer evening sessions where, just sit out and talking, no cell phones, no nothing like that. So my mother, and if my brother was born at the time, him, but my grandparents, which was my mother's mom and dad, and my great-grandparents, which was my grandmother's mom and dad, we were at their house, which literally is the house is kind of still standing. It's been sold, and they rebuilt and built around it and all that stuff, but the property's still there. Back then, my great-grandfather owned all this land around here. At one time, he owned 180 something acres. He was a farmer. So there was no other house. I mean, it was family land all around. So the only person that lived around here that wasn't related to us was a lady that lived down the road. And then Pa had a little sharecropper that lived in a house on the back part of his property. That was the only 2 people that had houses around here that were not related to us. And that lady may have been distantly related to us down the line. But anyway, that whole area where the house was is literally like right back over there, just 200 yards from where I'm sitting right now. There was probably 30 to 40 acres on that tract, and he owned all the property that my house is on now. My mom and dad live right up there about 700 yards away from me. My grandparents lived right across the road from me. But that tract, that main house, and where he had the cows and a few of his other smaller farms, the stuff that they had for themselves, not stuff that they took to sell, and a little farm pond that was, I think it's spring fed, from what I remember. Had a little spring that went way back up in the back part of the woods, and it flowed through into a little creek, and they dammed it into a little farm pond. We used to fish out there for bass and catfish, brim, things like that. So one night, I'm thinking it was a Friday night, because I'm thinking I was watching the Dukes of Hazzard, because, that was my show back then. I loved the Dukes of Hazzard. So they were out on the front porch talking. I was in the house watching TV. Old farmhouse, so it's kind of simple layout. You walked in off the front porch, and there's what we call the front room, the living room or whatever, where when we had big family gatherings, that's where everybody ended up sitting around and talking. And you went on through that, which was the den. That was where the TV and the wood stove was that heated the house. My grandmother wore those orthopedic braces on her legs that connected to the shoes. So she had to sleep in one of those old hospital beds. So it was in that room too. And then off to the left of that was my great grandfather's room. And then going back to the right, when you go in, was the kitchen and the little, basically what people call a mud room now, but that's where it's just the back porch is what we call it. Had one of those old metal screen doors with had the metal bottom and then the two glasses that you could raise. We called it a storm door, where you could lower it and had the metal screen mesh on top, or you could raise the one and you could get air circulating through the house. So from where I was sitting watching TV, go through the kitchen and into that back room, probably 12 to 15 feet away, however big the kitchen was, and then maybe another 2 feet. That wasn't a really big back porch. And back then when they built houses, you didn't bring in a big bulldozer and heavy equipment and level it out and build it all nice and flat and level. You set it on the piece of property and then you stack block up to make it to where this side of the house may be sitting flat on the ground, but then you may have a 5 or 6 foot area on the other side that you had to stack the cement block up to level it out. So the side where the back porch was on was probably about 5.5 feet off the ground. As they went and got those old cement steps that went up to the bottom of the door. So the top of that door is probably 12 feet off the ground, give or take. Like I said, it was nighttime. I finished watching the show. I get up, turn the TV off. For whatever reason, I still to this day have no understanding of why I turned and looked through that dark kitchen and onto that back porch. But when I looked out, the only light that was on inside the house was the light in the den where I was at watching TV. So, the kitchen's pretty dark, but you can still see light reflecting out to the door. So as I look out the door, I saw something and I'm like, what is that? I'm like 8, 9 years old, maybe 10 at the most, but probably about 8.5 to 9. And I'm looking and I'm seeing what I thought was a face or something in the top glasses door, but it was hunched down looking in. So the top of its head was like right at the top of that door. So I could only see from like here down. Its chest was come up to the middle of that door. So you do the math from what I told you earlier, this thing's pretty big. So I would start moving my head this way, and I noticed that if I moved this way, it was moving in the opposite direction. And then I would, just trying to get a good, like get my eyes to focus or whatever I was thinking in my mind. And, I'm thinking this is going on for minutes, but it's probably seconds. Then all of a sudden, everything just like it came into focus, just like, like you put up the cameras now and everything's blurry, and then you put your hand behind it and it automatically focuses and it comes in real quick. That's how it happened. The face just came into focus. It didn't have any hair around the eyes, the nose, and the lip area, but then it had long, shaggy fur, hair, whatever you want to call it, all over its face. I could tell it had the conical shaped head because I could see that it was going up to the point. But like I said, the door kind of cut part of it off. I don't know exactly what color it was. I just know it was a dark color because it was completely dark outside. So could have been dark gray, could have been black, could have been brown. It was dark. And I'm sitting there, and when that face came into focus, monster just came in my head. And like I said, I'm between 8 and 10 years old, and that's because back then you didn't have all the internet and all the things that you see now. There wasn't as much exposure to Bigfoot, Sasquatch, any of that kind of stuff. The only thing that I knew about Bigfoot at that time was, Andre the Giant playing him in The $6 Million Man. And that kind of scared the crap out of me as a kid. He was kicking Colonel Austin's butt. He was scary. So that's the only knowledge I had, or what you saw on In Search of Leonard Nimoy. I mean, you didn't, there was not that, wasn't as readily available back then as it is now. I haul butt through the front room, out on the front porch, start telling my mom, and my dad, or my stepdad, worked for Pickens County Sheriff's Office at the time. He was on second shift, and there again, no cell phones or nothing like that. I'm like, call dad, gotta call dad, get dad out here, get dad, get Uncle Brian down here. My uncle was probably 6'5", 350 at the time. He was a football player in high school, and in my mind, nobody could beat my dad or my uncle because my uncle was big and my dad was a cop. And I just seen a monster. I needed them down there. Well, so back in those days, my mom had to pick up the phone, call the sheriff's office, talk to dispatch, say, hey, I need Sergeant Constance to give me a call. So they had to wait for dispatch to call him. He had to drive somewhere where there was because he wasn't working in that area of the county. It wasn't like he could go by there. Drive somewhere where there's a phone, call, find out what's going on, and then drive wherever he was, from wherever he was at to where we were. So you're not talking like 2 minutes. You're talking like 30, 45, even an hour. So my uncle finally came down there. Well, he gets out on the back porch, and I stand in the den where I was at earlier. And he said, see, and he's standing out there and he's moving around on the door. And he said, see, it was a reflection. It was a trick of light, or, all the stuff that adults like to tell kids. I'm like, no, Uncle Brian, that was not, because its head was about 2 feet above where yours is at. And he was standing on the steps, obviously. That was my first. Of course, nobody believed me. My mom still doesn't believe me to this day. My story's never changed in 40 plus years, but she still don't believe me. She knows I saw something, but she don't believe that what I saw was a Bigfoot. My stepdad believes me. I don't know who else believes me. My real dad said, I know you saw something. I don't know if that's what you saw. He said, but I 100% believe that you saw something. He said, I don't think you were imagining anything. He said, I don't think my great-grandparents ever disbelieved me because they never said anything. And DA and I have talked about this several times, and I remember it now. I didn't remember it then, but I can remember my great-grandmother always telling me, because they kept me, because my mother was working, my dad was working, my grandparents were working. So when I got out of school, that's where I stayed. Well, that's what I did. I went out and played in the woods. And I can remember her saying, don't you go too far in the woods or the boogers will get you. Fast forward now to where it's commonplace to call them wood boogers or things like that. I didn't make that connection back then because there again, there's that disconnect of information because, now, wherever you live, what they call them in my neck of the woods. And I know what people in Alabama, but you didn't know that back then. So if it wasn't a common thing for them to be called boogers by anybody around here, you wouldn't know what I just thought she meant monsters or, something's going to get me. I didn't know what it was, but now knowing that, I think that they had a strong suspicion or knew 100% what was out there. So, and that kind of ignited I wanted to read anything I could read on them. I wanted to watch any shows I could watch on them. Anytime In Search Of was on, I'd turn it on just to see if it was about Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. I mean, if it was about something like aliens, I'd turn it off because that just didn't interest me. It's always been the cryptid stuff. I got to where I didn't tell my story. Obviously, you know how the story is that people call you crazy, and and I shut it out for like 40 years. Didn't tell anybody anything. And what got me back into it and talking about my story was reading DA's books, because there's a line in the first Wild Hunt book where he describes the things standing behind the tree doing this, tree peeking. And when I read that line, it was like reliving the experience because I just suppressed it for so long. I read that and remembered it doing that, and it just brought everything back to me. So that's what made me I had to get in touch with DA. So I sent him an email, and 1 turned into 2, turned into 20, turned into, me coming on the show and telling my story, then ended up me being his co-host. And that's where that's been for like 3.5 years that I've been his co-host on the show.
Wow.
So
that's been awesome.
We've gone, God, I can't count how many times we've gone out and, went in the woods together and looked for stuff and found stuff. It's been a wild ride ever since I sent that email to him.
Yeah, you should tell me about some of because I actually don't think I've heard about those where you and DA would go out and find stuff and you guys had experiences. Well,
the very first time I went down there, he wanted to take me to Joe Bald, which is where the Lakeview man that he wrote about, the police officer that was basically chasing the Bigfoot type creature, which was a Gugway. He wanted to take me out there. So we go out, just stepping out of the vehicle. It was like stepping out into a vacuum. It was dead quiet. There was no crickets. There was no frogs. There was nothing. And we'd seen deer and stuff like that on the way in, but as soon as we got there, it was just like dead. We saw eyeshine that night. We were pretty sure that there was something watching us other than just the eyeshine that we saw. And the first time when we first pulled in there, and this is a campsite that was a primitive campsite that's completely shut down. There's houses around there, but nothing major. But there is one of these white panel van. I know this sounds like a conspiracy thing, but I swear this is 100% true. There was a white panel van in there that had 24-hour service written on the side. Don't ask me what kind of 24-hour service, because it didn't say. It just said 24-hour service. And it stayed there the entire time we were there. And if we would go over to one side, it would move and kind of follow, not get too close to us, but move just close enough to where it could kind of keep us inside. So we're looking, and like I said, I had just got in, and we went straight out there. We didn't have time to get any casting material, no nothing. We just wanted to get out there. So it's me, DA, and his son, Noah. We're walking around, and of course, me being the tracking guy, that was the first thing I wanted to do. Is I wanted to get a flashlight on the ground, start looking for tracks and things like that. The lake was down, so there was just river rocks everywhere. Everywhere you looked, there was nothing but like rocks like this, just everywhere. And I'm like, dang, you can find nothing around here. Well, just as I said that in my mind, DA said, look, and I turn around and look, and there's a spot of mud, which in tracking is what we call a track trap. It's anything that's going to, that's going to trap a track. And it was about maybe 7 feet long by 3.5, 4 feet wide. I said, yep, I see it. That's where I'm headed. So we walked down there, and this is the weirdest substrate I've ever stepped on, because you could step on it in one spot and you would sink like a foot, and then take your next foot and put it down on right in front of your other foot, and it would be fine. You take 2 or 3 more steps and sink again. It was weird. The water table must have just been like up and down that whole area. But anyway, while we're sitting there looking, I turn around and look, and DA is looking on the other side of me, and Noah's kind of up above us. And I looked and I shined my flashlight, and I said, no way. And I said, DA, and he said, what? I said, look at that. He's like, holy crap, that's a footprint. I didn't say, look at this footprint. I just left it open. I'm not going to get my hands. I'm not kidding. It was like every bit that long and probably about that wide. Beautiful, perfect. But we didn't have anything to cast it. So DA's like, all right. We took some pictures of it, but I think DA still got them. But he's like, I'm going to come back to the hotel. We're going to pick you up in the morning. First thing in the morning, we're going to go back to Walmart. We're going to get some plaster. We're going to get back over here, and we're going to cast this thing. Sounds good. So we get back over there that morning at like 8 o'clock. Kid you not, there was a tire track driven through the middle of that track we found. And this was not like it was a bunch like anybody playing through there. And this was like literally maybe 150 feet off of the normal trail that people would drive through. This is downward. If the lake's up, this would have been underwater. So it's not like a place that people would normally drive. But you can see the tires went up and went through the track. You see where the tire pivoted, and it backed out. So it's just like a point like this. So it just drove through that track and backed out, and that's it.
That's wild, man. That is some straight up X-Files kind of stuff. Wow. Yep. Tell me a little bit about you becoming a police officer, getting into that field, just doing all of that.
Well, my stepdad he had 40 plus years. It was always in my blood. I wasn't sure that's what I wanted to do until I went to college. When I first went to college, I went for industrial electronics. Did a semester and a half of it and was like, I don't know if I like this or not. Well, then I had to take a class. You had to do like a work study or something like that. But I didn't know what I could do. So my teacher said, well, you can go. You don't have to know somebody in this field. You can do it in any field you want to. So my stepdad was a lieutenant at the sheriff's office at the time. He was over the juvenile division. He's like, well, yeah, you can come do it up here if they'll let you. So I asked my teacher. She said, yeah, you can do that. And she said, you need to not just go with your stepdad. You need to go, do multiple divisions and things like that. That way you get a broad spectrum of it. Because when I had to write the paper, you can't just write it on that one section. I had to spend like 2 weeks with the Uniform Patrol Division riding around. And that was all it took. I fell in love with it. And one of the guys that I was riding with turned out to be one of my best friends later in life. He was over the Explorer post at the time, which is basically like a cadet program. But you get in and start doing, they teach you how to do scenarios, how to answer calls, shooting, all this kind of stuff. Well, there's this big competition at the end of the year called SCALE, and I think it stood for South Carolina Association of Law Enforcement Explorers, and it was a division of the Boy Scouts, but it was geared towards law enforcement. So you go and compete at the end of the year in this competition against other explorer posts throughout the state and compete for, trophies for first, second, third place. And, but doing that, I was just like, man, this is what I want to do. I love this. And I graduated high school in 93. By 96, I was a certified police officer. So 3 years out of high school, I was doing what I'm doing now.
Police work demands facts. Investigation into the paranormal, cryptids, right? That thrives on the unknown. So how do you mentally bridge these two worlds? And was there ever a case that blurred the lines for you?
Well, and that's funny because DA and I've had this conversation because he's a retired police officer as well. So we always look at this as where's the facts, where's the evidence take us? And there's plenty of people who automatically jump to, oh, well, they portaled, oh, they're this, they're that. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen and that's not a possibility. But what we always say is you can't start at point A and go directly to point Z. You have to hit all the points in between and investigate. Because if I go to an investigation, DA uses this one all the time. So this is his, not mine, but I 100% agree with it. I go to a call and there's a guy in the house sitting in his chair with a gunshot wound in his chest, but the door's locked. I can't say, well, the killer must have portaled in and write that up because I'd be taking my chief would have me up for a stock evaluation and a whiz quiz the next day. You got to investigate it. I mean, there's obviously some way that somebody got in that house, whether it be that the door was unlocked and he locked it on his way out or what. I mean, you can't just jump to, you got to hit all those points in between. That's what we always try to do. We always try to look at, okay, what logically could this be? And once you've eliminated, it's Occam's razor. Once you've eliminated all the logical possible explanations, then you look at the illogical. And a lot of these things, you've only got to look at nature, like the adaptive camouflage. When people say they cloak like predator, well, polar bears have adaptive camouflage. Certain sharks have adaptive camouflage. Owls, insects. The list in nature goes on of what has adaptive camouflage. Clear hair shafts. Polar bear's hair fur is not white. It's clear, but it appears white because it lives in the snow. How many times have you seen these nature shows where a polar bear's hunting over an ice hole for a seal and it's sitting there like this? And I ask people, well, what do you think it's doing? Well, I don't know. What color is its nose? Black. I said, all right, if you're a seal and you're getting ready to come up for air and you look up and you see that big black nose staring down at you, what are you going to do? Well, I'm probably going to go to the next hole. Yeah. But if you don't see that, all you see is white and you come up, then you're a chicken tender.
How does the stress of hunting unknown entities compare to police work? And what unique resilience strategies have you developed for your investigations?
I've always thought that people who do the job that I do are not wired right anyway, because we're running towards the gunshots or whatever the danger may be. A lot of people say we've got sick and twisted senses of humor. Yeah, we do. But that's how you have to compartmentalize a lot of the stuff you see. I mean, I've seen stuff that most normal people shouldn't see in their life. I've seen babies they're no longer alive. Just put it that way. If you don't compartmentalize stuff like that, if you don't deal with it in ways that most people don't understand, those people don't make it long in this field. And I think a lot of this is the same way. That's why I think a lot of adults that have sightings, you got one or two reactions. And I'm sure you talk to people, you've read all these emails and stories and things like that. You got one or two reactions. You either get somebody who's like, oh my gosh, I got to get into this. Or you get somebody who never goes in the woods again. They might have been in the woods in their entire life and it totally pushes them. And that's why I'm glad that I had my reaction or my interaction when I was a kid, because I was able to deal with it a lot more. Your mind is able to deal with stuff like that when you're younger. Because when that paradigm shift happens, and that switch is flipped, you can't unflip it. Once you see things like this, you can't unsee them. It's just like law enforcement. When you see stuff like that, you can't unsee it. It's there. I mean, it's stuff that's always going to be in my head and is always going to be bothering me on some level, but I just deal with it. And how I deal with it, I don't know. I think that there are people who are meant for that kind of stuff, and they're the ones that end up doing it. Now, does that mean that everybody that does it and keeps doing it for a long time is doing it for the right reasons? No, I know you have to have a certain mind. It's just like being, a soldier, being a special forces operator, things like the paramedic, nurse. You have to have a different mindset to do jobs like that. I'm not the kind of person that can sit in an office all day and crunch numbers and do things like that. That's not me. But there are people who are suited for that. And I don't think there are people that do that could come out and do some of the stuff that I do. And that's not saying that I'm any better than anybody. It's just, I think certain people are made to do certain things. And I think that translates pretty well into investigating this kind of stuff, because you're already in that mindset of, okay, I'm just going to deal with whatever happens.
You know, you talked about compartmentalizing. I have a good friend of mine, good family friend, who I don't know if he still does it actually, but he was an EMT for many years. And I've always wondered, how do you witness to awful human tragedy and just become, well, first off, how do you become so desensitized to it other than just seeing it so much? And secondly, how do you psychologically deal with that? I mean, it's one thing to, see suicide and murder, but it's another to see horrific things like abuse and, dead children and just, the horrible things that the majority of civilians will never hopefully have to see.
I don't know what it is that helps you deal with that. Or I think with me, a lot of it is, I always live by that sheepdog motto. And, that's why I put that in my book. That you want to get on camera too? Sorry.
Hey, he's more than welcome.
I always live by that sheepdog motto, that I was chosen to do what I do for a reason. There are people who can't protect themselves, can't stand up for themselves, and have to have somebody to do the things that they can't do. And I look at it as, I'm more than capable of doing some of the things that these people that I'm putting in jail do, but I choose not to. I choose to do things the right way. I have that propensity for that because if I had to shoot somebody, there's no doubt in my mind I could pull the trigger and cancel somebody's birth certificate in a heartbeat if I had to. But I don't choose to go out and just indiscriminately do things like that, like some of these other people do. And I think that's where the difference in people is. Not, most everybody is a good person that's just wanting to do their thing and go on about their business and be left alone. Then you got the wolves, so to speak. They want to thrive in the evil. They want to hurt people. They want to do everything they can to make everybody else's life miserable. And then you got the people like me and DA and Doc and people like that who, we can do those kind of things if we have to the people that we have to do them to, but we choose to try to lead that good life. But I'm never going to be that wholesome guy that's just like, oh, gee, golly gosh, everything's great, because I know what's out there. And I'm not just talking about the stuff that we hunt on this kind of stuff. Humans will kill you quicker than just about anything else on the face of this earth. The animals will kill you for reasons, food, territory. You scared them, to protect their young. Very, very rarely do animals kill without a reason. Humans are only creatures on this planet that will kill you just because, hey, I want to see what that's like.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the similarities between, say, like military training and police training, where when it comes down to it and you're in a life or death situation, you don't have time to think and go. I mean, you just have to react, and that's why your training's there. So you just, it's the same for people, like who practice martial arts or boxing. Like, you don't have time to block a punch. You just got to react and just allow yourself to. And I can't imagine how difficult that's got to be when it's like, hey, I have to kill this person because it's either them or me, and I got to do what I got to do. With that said, how would you say your law enforcement background and assessing testimony and scenes shaped your analysis of evidence and eyewitness accounts?
That's another thing that we've talked about ad nauseum. I've taken thousands and thousands and thousands of statements from people over my career. And that's good enough to put somebody in jail and possibly even, take their life away from them. But it's not good enough for that same person to say, hey, I saw Bigfoot or Dogman. It's not good enough for you to believe it on that state. It's okay to put somebody in jail or even take their life from them, but it's not okay to say they saw a Bigfoot. I mean, so I think that it's helped me because obviously I've got that experience taking statements from people, and you have to be a good judge of character. In my line of work, you have to know how to read people. You have to know how to differentiate the BS from the truth. Because, there's always three sides to every story. There's their side, and somewhere in the middle, there's the truth. And that doesn't mean anybody's lying. It's just a perspective thing. perspective is a big thing. Good example of that is Johnny and I. We were out at our place that we go look at or go investigate, and we were like on the opposite side, or just a little ways apart from each other. We were looking at an angle at this thing that was looking back at us. I saw like a light brownish color. He saw a dark color, like almost a black. My line, there's Johnny line, but the way the sunlight was hitting it, and the way where the background and foreground around it was causing a different look. It's a perspective thing. And Johnny wasn't lying about what color he saw. I wasn't lying about what color I saw. It's just a perspective thing, and you got to learn how to differentiate when somebody's just absolutely feeding you a line versus just their perspective that may be different than. And that's what like when we talk about, we let people come on and talk on the show about no matter what belief they have, because I haven't witnessed anything like a portal or any of that kind of stuff doesn't mean it hasn't happened. The only thing that I've ever witnessed out in the field shows me that it's just an animal. But does that mean that's 100% accurate? No, that's just what I've experienced, and that's the only gauge that I have. You can still tell when when they're talking and they're telling you your stuff. You can just tell when people are just pulling stuff, out of the air, and that's when you go like, okay. But now I've heard people say stuff that I can't explain, but I honestly don't think that they were lying to me. I think their perspective, Jessica Jones, great friend of mine. Jessica's got a lot of different beliefs as far as these things go than I do. But Jessica has had some experiences that I can't explain. I've never had a paranormal experience.
One of the things that's really terrified me is when you see an eyewitness speak, and they don't just tell you the story, but they start like getting shooken up, and they start getting emotional, and you could tell they're just reliving a trauma. And that to me, I started thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my God, either you're an Oscar winning actor or, you like, this is like, now I'm terrified. Your hair starts getting up, you start getting the chills. You're like, oh my gosh, like this is.
That's why Fred, when you hear Fred Roll tell his story, I don't know if you've ever heard him tell his story.
I don't know who he is.
Fred from Alaska, Fred Roll does the subarctic Sasquatch reporters. Anyway, he's been on our show a couple times. I've heard Fred tell this story multiple times. Every time he tells it, you can just see him reliving the terror that he had. His dogs will actually get worked up when he starts telling it, because they can tell that he's going through it emotionally. It's like, when I retell mine, I can see it, but it wasn't a scary. I mean, it was at the time when it happened. But as I've gotten older, and I thought, because people ask me, well, do you think that thing wanted to hurt you? I'm like, if that thing had wanted to hurt me, there's no way that I would be sitting here telling my story, because that little door that it was looking at me through would not have stopped this thing. So I can sit here and 100% tell you that it was a curiosity thing. So it's not something that's scarred me mentally. It's not something. Now, I know plenty of people who've had, like Fred, who've had different encounters. And you could tell, like you said, it's left something on them. I mean, and I'm glad that I didn't have something like that, because I don't know if I'd have been the same person that I am if I'd have had that.
And I know there's people that say, they're like, well, that person really believes they had this experience. And, I can understand where they're coming from, but there's many people across this whole span of this whole field that I've listened to. I'd say probably at least 10 off the top of my head that have like visibly broken down, and you could just tell like that they're reliving. I mean, it's not even an experience, it's a trauma at that point. They are going through it. It's literally the equivalent of hearing some people talk about horrific childhood abuse, and they're just like sobbing and just, they're trying to get through. And it's like, at that level of emotional intensity, I would really disagree with the notion that, oh, well, they just mistook the identity. Oh, it was just a bear. You don't have that kind of reaction to
and that's
my take.
I've got a theory about the bear thing. We are so conditioned. And when I say we, I don't mean people like you and me and DA and Fred and all these people that have the switch has been flipped, so to speak. But everybody is so conditioned now, especially nowadays. Oh, it's a misidentified bear. Bear. Misidentified bear. It's a bear. That's all you hear. How many sightings do you think they would have if that was not part of it? If it was just out there, okay, we don't know what's out there. That was the narrative. anything could be out there. How many of those bear sightings would somebody actually say, oh, it was a bear? Would somebody say, and instead of them in their brain thinking, oh, I just saw a bear, because they've been so conditioned for that. It's just like, you ever got a car, you went and bought this car, you're like, man, I got this new car. And you drove down the road, and every single car you see seems to be the car that you just bought. But you'd never seen that car on the road before you bought that car and was driving in it. You've experienced that, right? Why? Because that car is in your mind. Before, you probably had just as many of those cars pass you as you did before, but you weren't looking for them because that was not what was predominantly in your brain. Same thing here. It's Pavlov's dogs. It's what we've been conditioned to think. Oh, it's a bear. It's a bear. That's what it is. It's a bear. How many of these things, if that was not what was the narrative, how many people would just say, oh, I saw a dogman, or oh, I saw a Bigfoot? I mean, think about how many sightings we got now, and how many would that multiply if we did not, if like Native Americans, First Nations tribes, it's just a foregone conclusion. It's like them seeing a squirrel in the woods. I mean, they just know and accept it. Same thing with a lot of places overseas. It's not so taboo to say I saw a Bigfoot, or I saw a Janoskwa, or I saw a Gugway, or whatever the case may be. I saw Shiatanka. I mean, it's not so taboo as it is in the United States for us citizens of the United States, which I don't understand why it is, but for some reason it is, and you're labeled as crazy if you've seen these things. If that was not the narrative, how many, I think sightings would like triple or even maybe quadruple.
Yeah, I think a lot of that too is also just the availability of these communities, on Facebook, Reddit, YouTube. That's really opened the door, and I think showed a lot of people that they're not isolated, like, oh, wow, there's many like me who've had horrific accounts, or even just like, hey, I had like a minute sighting, and unfortunately there's many who've gone to the grave with their account that we'll never hear, unfortunately. But I think that's one of the reasons why I like to do this, and also why I kind of started doing the podcast thing, because I'm like, I really want a chance for people to get to, it's one thing to write out your story, but it's a whole other thing to, to actually just, this is like people's therapy session, really. And, I was talking to a gentleman, I won't name his name. Unfortunately, he had come to the decision that he was not going to do the show. He was going to initially, and then he's like, man, I can't do it. And I was like, I respect and understand that. I said, well, the opportunity is open if you want to, but I think he was just having a really hard time coming to terms with the fact that he would have to just relive it. And he was telling me that, he had gotten called crazy before. And it's just, I get it. It's the nature of the beast, and so. Yeah. With that said, I know you'd mentioned Fred's, but I know you and DA have dealt with a lot of eyewitness accounts in person and over email, over the show. What have been some that have like really stuck with you just through the years?
That's a good question, because there's been a lot. I think, the siege at Palmyra has always been one that's kind of, that's all that, because there's so many things about that, and I look at that more as okay, this could have been gone so differently if he had just done things differently. It's almost like they were in that situation, but they were in that situation because the dad kind of allowed them to be in that situation by not putting his foot down and saying, oh, look, we're going to keep at least one gun in the house instead of every single one.
That life.
Yeah, it's a scary situation I wouldn't want to be in, but I would never be in that situation because I'm not going to be that far away from my guns. I'm sorry. I raised 2 kids in my house, and they knew if they touched my guns without my permission, they wasn't going to sit down for a month. It's just the way it is. So that's a scary story, and it was horrible what they had to go through, but it was preventable if things had been done differently. But then there's another story. I don't know if you've heard the one DA talks about it, or we've talked about it before, about the guy who he's upstairs asleep, and his little dog starts going nuts, and he had to put a dog door in his house so the dog could go out in the backyard so he wouldn't have to get up at night and let the dog out. Well, the dog's standing at the top of the steps just going nuts. And he's like, just freaking go. That's what the dog door's there for. Just go. And the dog would stop. Finally, he gets up, and he said he went around to the top of the steps and looked down, and he sees this dog man with his one arm and half its head coming through the dog door. That would be a scary situation. I don't care who you are.
I mean, what do you do? I mean, at first you'd be like, but my first instinct would be, you know, get a firearm now.
Yeah, I think he went for his 12 gauge, but when from what I understand, when he got back, it was pulling out. So I do believe he did sling some lead at it, but his next move was to get rid of that doggy door.
Wow. I don't think Dave's ever told me that one. There's one he did tell me in particular, and I'm sure you know more about it. It had to do with, I want to say, someone who worked for the National Park Service. I don't know if they were on a kayak or a boat, but they were coming down a river. I think this is in the LBL area. And there was a group of campers, a young man and a woman, and probably in their early 20s, and they were camping. And this Gugway thing, at least what I assume, came out, and, you know, he's yelling to him, but they're probably like 100 yards out, you know, so it's like, whoa, 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 you know, and so he's like, look up behind you, and they didn't see him, and this thing just basically tore them to pieces, you know, and he has a front row seat, you know, of everything going on. And yeah, that's kind of like a too long didn't read from DR, but I'll have to ask him more about that. But like one of those, like when he shared that with me, that just really stuck with me, because you're just like, my gosh. I've driven through it, you know, on that main, I can't think of the highway in Tennessee, but it's like you go over the bridge, and if you're heading east, it's on your left, like all LBL is right, but you're kind of just keep going. Yeah. So that's the closest I've been to it.
That place is a different kind of creepy. We were at DeMumbers Bay, and it was 11 o'clock in the morning, and Johnny and I, my buddy Johnny that used to do the show with me, we were sitting there, and he was like, dude, there's no ducks, there's no geese, there's no birds, there's no squirrels, there's no possums. The only there we could hear like crows or something like over on the other side of the lake. And I think we were at Lake Kentucky, where DeMumbers Bay. Anyway, we were at DeMumbers Bay. I know that, but you could hear them on the other side of the lake. Where we were at was nothing. I mean, just in 11 o'clock in the daytime. And we were looking around, and I looked at him. I said, Johnny, I would not at all be shocked if Jason Voorhees stepped out from behind one of these trees. That was just the feel of this place. It looked just like, I mean, you've seen the Friday the 13th movies, I'm assuming, correct? Those woods and just that eerie feeling, that's what that place was. It's creepy. There were some people out there camping but that was the only other sounds that were out there. And me and Johnny walked back through the woods probably 150, 200 yards. You know, we were away from them and couldn't hear them, and then it was just dead. There was no squirrels in the trees. There was no the only animal signs that we saw, other than hearing those crows, were we found a bunch of fish skeletons up and down the beach. And I'm talking like long, big fish. Some of their heads were like that thick. Some of them were just complete, almost like the old Tom and Jerry cartoon where he pulls the head out with the skeleton still intact. That's what it looked like. And they were all over the place. That is a weird place. Now you go under the underpass on the bridge that goes over where you were talking about, where you drove past it. You go over onto the south side, peaceful, everything's great. You see deer all over the place. You know, that's where the wood bison are. That's where the elk are. But you go back on the other side, it's a whole different world. Whole different level of creepy.
And isn't it like what is it, like 3 miles? Because it's from that main road up into where you're kind of like going up into, excuse my poor geography, up into Kentucky, right? Where Three Rivers is, I think is what it's called.
It is in Kentucky and Tennessee. It's in both states, because the Tennessee River Commission or Tennessee River Valley Commission, whatever the name of it was, is the one that actually dammed up, because it used to be the land between the rivers, because it was 3 rivers. Now it's the land between the lakes, because when they dammed all that stuff up and flooded all that, from what I understand, there's still plenty of houses underneath those lakes.
Yeah.
And and this is something, another thing that sounds like either out of a horror magazine, or horror movie rather, or a conspiracy theory. I didn't go on a road down there that didn't have a cemetery on it. I've never seen so many cemeteries in my life. Now, the encounter we had down there, I went back and talked to Martin Groves. He was down there at that, because we were at the meet and greet for woodwalkers. You know, Martin knows pretty good bit about that area. So I went back the next day, was telling Martin where we were at, where we had it. And he said, I said, what? He said, You're about 100 yards from that original, for the site from that original story back in the 80s with the family. I'm like, great. We're right there at it.
Yeah, that whole area, you think there's so much history just even before with Land Between the Rivers, because wasn't it in like, I did the episode probably about like 6 weeks or so ago, and some of it's still in my mind. And if I remember right, it was like 65 or something that they came in there, and the feds kind of like, okay, we're going to do this. And they kicked everybody out, but a lot of people wouldn't leave. And, or at least I'm sure there's some that didn't leave. And so, I mean, there's whole communities.
A lot of those houses that I was talking about that were there, people didn't leave them. They just flooded it. From my understanding, the Cherokee in that area said that, their name for that place is like cursed land or something like that. Why are we so surprised when we go into an area called the Devil's Frying Pan and something bad happens? I mean, it didn't get that name because it was a nice place, Devil's Fork. I mean, you don't go into Cupcake Land and expect to see anything, but we don't have any of that stuff. It's always Devil's Fork or Devil's Elbow, Devil's Frying Pan, or, Dragon's Tooth.
I think we've really been conditioned to believe that, there was so much superstition and that none of it is grounded in reality because, with modern day science, if you can't test it in a lab, if you can't physically manipulate, see, smell, touch, then it by definition doesn't exist. And it's
we're too smart for our own good now is what it is.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people that try to make cases. They're like, oh, well, the supernatural doesn't exist and everything can be explained. Okay, fair enough. But then how is it that there's thousands of people with not just experiences, but I mean, like even going back, years and years and years. And I'm not talking like Bigfoot or anything. I'm just talking about just in general, whether it be, ghosts or orb. Yeah. I mean, there's just a myriad of categories of strange that it's like, well, how do you explain? I don't know. Just, it doesn't make any sense, People who are experienced, law enforcement, government officials, military, people who are intelligent, high IQ, right? Mm-hmm. Just that's the kind of stuff that irks me. A lot of these people that claim that these eyewitnesses are just, oh, it's a bear. I'm like, well, that's interesting because these are people who spend a lot of time in the woods. So, like they out of anybody would know like, oh, well, that's definitely the rump of a bear, or oh, that's the shoulder of a bear. I'm like,
and it's the same thing when you get people say, well, I've spent my whole life in the woods. I ain't never seen it. Okay. That's the equivalent of going and taking a teaspoon and going to the ocean and pulling up, a teaspoonful of salt water, of ocean water, and saying, well, I don't see no sharks in that. So there must not be any such thing as sharks because I didn't see it in this one small sample size that I looked at. So these people I've been in the woods all my life. Well, have you been there's 88 million acres of national forests in this country. And that's just the national parks. That don't count state parks. That don't count public use ways, Bureau of Land Management. That doesn't count any of that. You get up over 1 billion acres when you start adding up all that stuff in. But there's 88 million acres of national forest. Have you been in all those 88 million acres? No? Okay, well then your sample size is really small. So you can't say that it doesn't exist because you haven't seen it in, had I not gone to SeaWorld, I would have never seen a killer whale in real life, but I know they exist. And think about it this way, and I love this analogy. And let's go back to Bigfoot, and let's say if Bigfoot is a hoax, it's been a hoax the entire time. How big of an agency and corporation would it take to keep this thing going as long as it's been going, with as many different witnesses, as many different tracks and footprints and all kinds of scat and hair and all this stuff? How big of an agency would that have to be to keep something like that going for as long as it's been going? And let's just go back to the 1940s when the term Bigfoot was coined, or the 1950s rather. The concerted effort it would take to keep a hoax like that going, and the number of people that probably would have confessed on their deathbeds. Oh, yeah, I'm part of Operation Bigfoot. It was all a hoax. I mean, never heard that. Roger Patterson never changed a word of his story, even on his deathbed. Bob Gimlin's never changed a word of his story. Fred's never changed a word of his story. I've never changed a word of my story. DA's never changed a word of his story. Think about how hard it would be to keep something. It's easier when you start thinking about it in those terms. It's easier to believe that it's real, and it just has not been, it's hard to find because of it lives in caves, or, it's in the middle of all these 88 million acres of national forest, which Teddy Roosevelt set aside. That's a whole nother can of worms there.
Yeah. You were mentioning Operation Bigfoot. I was going to say plot twist. That's where all of our tax dollars are going to.
But if you think about it in those terms, it's a whole lot easier to believe this. I mean, look at Billy apes. They were discovered in 1998. A 6-foot upright walking chimp that uses tools, kills lions, drags people out of villages. Sounds kind of familiar, don't it? Maybe it's just a smaller cousin of a Bigfoot. Maybe not. I don't know. But, smart people said, they don't know what they're talking about until National Geographic got them on camera.
Can you share a time skepticism or a dead-end investigation made you question this path? What kept you going? Skepticism being that you were skeptical in your investigation.
The thing, and I don't know if this was something that was like forced me into thinking, wow, what am I doing? When we were all up in Missouri this last time, we went out to Blunk Road, which is another location that DA used in the books. And I've been out there before. We found all kinds of mutilated deer carcasses out there, stuff we can't explain. It's stuff that I've shown to hunters that are like, nah, poachers don't do stuff like that. So we go back out there because Doc had never been out there. And, of course, he wanted to go, so we go out there. We're in a big Jeep, Grand Cherokee, Grand Wagoneer, something like that Doc had rented. And it's me, DA, Doc, and Noah, DA's son. We pull out or down to the end of the road. We turn and kind of, the boat ramp was down at the end, and we kind of turned this way. So we were like, I was sitting behind Doc, and he was driving. So the driver's side of the vehicle was facing towards the water. We get out, and we look out, and this is on the James River, which feeds into the Niagara and then feeds into Table Rock Lake. So we're looking, and the current is flowing one way. Well, we see something, and it's moving against the current, but it's so far out. Doc put the headlights on it, but it was so far out you wouldn't get a clear image of what it was. But it had the conical shape and then wide shoulder shape looking, and then everything else was in the water. So immediately we all think, oh crap, that's a Bigfoot walking at us. For whatever reason, we got in the car and we started heading out of there. I was walking towards it, and they had to Robbie wrangle me back into the car. So we get there, and the whole time I'm like, was that a Bigfoot walking towards it? No, that was just a stump or a tree log or something sticking up in the water. So we make it to the end of Blunt Road. Doc says, let's go back. So we flip around, we head back down there and get a little bit closer. This time they won't let me out of the car. Because Doc's like, if that son gets out of the water, I'm not going to grab you. You're going to stay in the car. We get there, and it's still there, but it looks like it's gotten closer to the bank. But it's hard to tell because the current's moving against it. It's at night when you got headlights playing on it and water's moving. It can play with your eyes. So at this point, I'm like, I just think that's something. At first I was on board with it, but at first I was like, nah, I don't think so. And they were all like, oh no, that's what it is. And I'm like, I just think it's just a tree log or a tree stump or a log or something. It's just. So we get back to the hotel room after we drop DA and Noah off, and I told Doc, I said, I don't know, just something I just don't feel it right. And Doc's like, nah, man, I'm serious. That's what it was. Well, DA called about that time, and he said, hey, I'm going to get a buddy of mine who works for the county down that way. I'm going to get him to go down there in the morning and see if that's still down there. Because if it was a stump or a log or something like that, then obviously it'd still be down there. So the guy goes down there the next morning. There's nothing there. So I was skeptical because they were sure it was. At first I was too, because that's what. But I thought, well, I'm just because then I was like, nah, I'm not trusting my gut on this one. I just don't. I think that was just a log sitting there. And then he sends him down there the very next day, and there was nothing there. They even sent DA a picture back of that exact area, and there was nothing there. Okay, yeah, I guess we did see it then.
With everything you've done as an officer, just doing field investigations in this niche, how has that inspired you as an author?
Yeah, I've always had and as my parents would say, an overactive imagination. And I've always been the one that, if I read a book about a movie that I've liked, I've always enjoyed the book better because I can play it in my head and I'm like, that's a way cooler movie than what I just watched. Why didn't they put that on the screen? And, so there's always been that. Growing up, my brother was 8 years younger than me, so I didn't have anybody for the first 8 years of my life. I didn't have any siblings. So I had to make do with, entertaining myself a lot of times, like going out in the woods and looking around, learning animal sounds, learning all this kind of stuff. And I had to make do. And then by the time my brother come along, by the time he was old enough to get out and want to do stuff, I'm already close to junior high school age at this time. So I'm already kind of way past that point. So I just had to have that imagination and that creativity to go out and entertain myself. So I've always had that part of it. I've always had that kind of memory where I wasn't good in school as far as school bored me. Honestly, I probably could have done a lot better than I did. But I've always had that memory where you could probably ask me who won the first NWA television championship belt, and I can tell you from NWA days back in the early 80s, that kind of memory. So being able to remember things and chronologically put things in order to make it make sense has always been one of my strong suits. So it just kind of fit. And then being friends with DA and learning from him, sitting there, being one of his alpha readers and seeing the process and learning that kind of stuff. It's just, he's always became friends. And I told him that because I've had that story or a version of it in my head for over 25 years. That's how long it took me to finally write that first one. And he was constantly, do it, write it, come on, just do it like you. Because I was like, no, man, I don't like typing. I don't want to have to do this. He said, dude, just write like you're writing a report. He said, how many reports have you written in your career? I said, hundreds of thousands, probably. He said, just write it like that. He said, we can always polish whatever needs to be polished. He said, just do it. He said, if you do it and it's not fun or it doesn't, at least you can, you've done it. But you got to try it first. And I'm glad I did.
What would you say is the most common misunderstanding about what you and people like DA do? I don't want to limit it to just cryptid investigation, but
so supernatural. Obviously, the biggest misconception is because you got some people that want to say that they're experts. So a lot of times people lump you in that category. Oh, you think you know everything. We say all the time. I know you've heard us say it. There are no such thing as experts in this field. Anybody that tells you they're an expert, you need to turn around and go the other way. Because until there's one in a zoo or something like that, there's nobody that's an expert on these things. The closest thing you will find an expert is a primatologist. And they're still not going to know everything because we don't know how different these things are, the great apes that we know about. Because how different are a gorilla and an orangutan? Their behaviors and their habitats and the things they eat. So I think that's a really big misconception. People like to think, oh, we're sitting here telling people what we think what we say is the gospel on this, and we don't. We say constantly that this is our opinion. Anything you hear us say on our show, what we believe based on what we have witnessed or what we have watched on a video and kind of went over. But we always tell people, make your own opinions, draw your own conclusions. Don't take what we say. That's a misconception. That's also one of my pet peeves when people start lumping us into that category before they even. I've had conversations, using the term conversation loosely, with people on the chat that love to speak before they get this in gear before this gets in gear. I get really defensive about stuff like that. Especially when people started questioning our integrity, because that's something really important to me, DA and Doc. We'll never say that what we're saying is 100% accurate. We always say this is our opinion. We never try to tell people how to think or how to feel. If you want to feel like these are spiritual creatures that can mind speak with you, then that's your right to feel that way. I've never witnessed it, but I'll be the first to if it happens to me, I'll be the first to come say, you know what, I was wrong and you're right. But until I've witnessed that, that's all I can go by is what I've witnessed, and that's the only thing I've seen is it's an animal. Not saying that I'm 100% right, but so I hope that was kind of a roundabout way to get to it. But
with all the various stories and legends from all these native tribes all over the country, right? Every single one of them has a story. Why do you think that is? That's
an easy answer, because it's real. Every major civilization on every major continent has a story about something like this. The Almasti, the Almas, the Garen, the Yeti, Yowie, Mapinguari, Orang Pendak, Shiatanka. I mean, how many times or how many names do you have to go through on how many different continents, on how many different civilizations before it sinks in? These people didn't have the Googles back then, and they could just look online and see what everybody else was looking at. They couldn't communicate. I mean, they didn't communicate with all these other people. So how do they have all this stuff? How can you crawl in a cave in Arizona and see a cave painting of one of these things that's dated, a couple thousand years ago, and see the same thing in the borders of the map of the Pure Rice map? That's one of the oldest known writings that we have in this world. The Inca stones, 4,000 years old, with drawings of what we call Stegosaurus and a Tyrannosaurus Rex and Brontosaurus and Iguanodons. How do they draw pictures of what we have in books now that have these known names? How did they do that if they didn't see them?
This would bring me to my next question, where with everything that you study and that you've researched and, that you look into, what would you say is being covered up or hidden from public, and why?
The big thing, I think, is, as far as sticking with Bigfoot first and any of those normal type cryptids, obviously I think those are a big cover up. And a lot, like I said earlier, 88 million acres of national forest, outdoor camping and all that, and campsites and all that stuff. That's a $33 million a year industry. The government makes $33 million a year off that, not the revenue off that. That's a pretty good incentive to keep some of these things, because you got two problems if you admit this thing happens. Just in the outdoor camping thing. I'm not talking about logging and all the problems it would cause with that, but just for the outdoor recreational industry, you're going to have people that want to go in and start hunting it and killing it. So you've got people with guns all over the place, and you're losing money from people who are just taking their families out and camping go to the same campsite every year. And I hate to sound as callous and say it as that way, but money makes the world go round, and our government is not. I'm not going to say we're an evil entity like some, but we're not the touchy-feely, lovey-huggy that everybody wants, good guys and heroes in the story that everybody wants to believe we are. I mean, our government does things, most people, and it's the way it is. I mean, we taught dolphins to plant mines on ships in World War II, in Vietnam. I mean, if you're going to do something like that, then yeah, you're going to cover up. I think that's why wood bison and elk were reintroduced into the LBL. Give the thing something else to go after versus other than humans, so we don't have to constantly cover up all these attacks.
I agree with you on those. I think there's one key component, though, and that would be if those things were to come out to the public, the overall distrust in would cause, it would be at such a level that it would just be complete chaos.
Yeah, and I think they've done soft disclosures to kind of combat stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
In the 80s, I believe, the Army Field Manual for the Pacific Northwest actually listed Bigfoot as a creature you could encounter while you're out on missions in the woods.
I think it's because people interpret that as like, oh, it's just satire, that's funny.
Yeah, and it may be, but I think that that's a form of soft disclosure that they can say, well, it's just like when all that stuff happened with the unidentified or the UFOs a couple years ago when the Super Bowl happened. The Pentagon actually went on, but they went on YouTube. It was buried on YouTube. They didn't come across the TV and interrupt the Super Bowl or anything else was going on. They went on YouTube. SecDef was on, the head of NORAD, and one other major, because me and DA actually went on and covered that, and it was like buried on YouTube. But it's plausible deniability. They can say, hey, we told you, we went online and told you. But think about it, when we were kids, what'd they do when anytime the president or anybody like that had to say, you couldn't see nothing else on TV other than that. I mean, granted, we only had 3 channels back then, but still, they would cut everything. That's all you would see. So you would think something like that would warrant something like that, but they didn't.
What are your thoughts and opinions on just the entire, I don't want to say UAP phenomenon, but maybe the UAP disclosure movement? And my question specifically would be, what are your thoughts on that? But also, why are they choosing now to slowly disclose it?
I wish I could get more information from my brother, because he was actually a helicopter pilot in the Marine Corps before he went through something with his, he ended up having, gluten intolerance, but they thought he had celiac disease. By the time they finally figured it out, he had lost all it. He was like 3 weeks from graduating from his finishing he was going to be a Cobra pilot. 3 weeks from finishing when all this stuff started happening. So they had to ground him before they could figure out what was going on. And then, long story short, by the time they figured it all out, he lost his instrument rating. He would have to turn around and start from the very beginning again. But I wish, he's almost a lieutenant colonel now. So he's on up in that upper ring of, he ain't going to tell his big brother who's the cryptid hunter and does all stuff. He's not going to tell me anything. I mean, he's got top secret clearance. So,
yeah.
I wish I could get more information out of him about some of that stuff because I know he's probably friends with pilots who have seen stuff. And that is something I can't say that this last trip to Missouri, I saw UFOs. First time I ever said it. Don't know what it was other than a UFO, but it was up there with my Bigfoot sighting as the coolest. And I was like, what am I looking at? Things in my life. We watched this thing for over 2.5 hours.
Wow.
We were literally out there looking for Bigfoot and we saw this and it was just like, and Bigfoot was completely out the door because we were just so, what are we looking at? From the horizon that was right behind it. From where we were standing to that horizon was right behind it. If I had to put a distance on, I'd say it was about a mile away. And this was just this ball of light that was all over the place. At one time, it would look like a heartbeat monitor because it would go, and it would loop around. It was all over the place. We had a guy with a FLIR. He looked at it, no heat signature whatsoever. No red or green blinking lights. So it wasn't a drone because it didn't, like I said, it didn't have a heat signature, didn't have any red or green lights. It was just solid white light moving all over the place. And I'm talking fast. It was like sometimes it would go from like here to here like that, and you just almost couldn't follow it. It was so fast. Well, they went back out the next morning and flew a drone out there. There was no houses. There was no right-of-ways with light poles or anything on them. There was nothing. And it's just a big empty field. And then it crossed over to the campsite we're at and then back up the mountain, nothing. And they said they went back out right after dark the next night because I'd ended up leaving earlier that day and it wasn't there. Well, they go back about 11 o'clock and it's back up there again.
The fact that you saw it for 2 hours, like that's pretty crazy. There's no misidentifying that.
Well, and that's the other thing. Before we saw it, we saw planes flying overhead. Once that was there, we didn't see any more planes. We'd seen a satellite go over and then we saw a couple planes, but we didn't see nothing else. And one of the guys that was there on the expedition with us, I was down there with the BFRO expedition, and one of the guys, he was ufologist. Is that what that's called? Somebody who studies UFOs? Yeah. He had because it was funny because he was into that, but he was down there for the Bigfoot part of it. So when we see that, he goes complete nerd on it, which it was cool, and I'm glad he had. But he had some kind of antenna thing that it would ping from the low band 100s all the way up to the 900 band, and it's constantly scroll set. And he said it picks a police band, helicopter, airplanes. I mean everything. Well, this thing was pinging between 200 and 400, and it was just in a loop. It wouldn't. He said it's not supposed to do that, and there was nothing. He wasn't picking up anything. No airplane chatter, no helicopters, no patrol cars going by. He wasn't picking up nothing, and it was just like in that constant spiral loop. He was like, "What is this thing doing? It's not supposed to do this." Well, we got back to the camp that night, and he turned it back on, and it was working again. And it was going through, and we could hear like patrol cars going by. We could hear them talking, hear the planes talking, going overhead. And he was like, "This is what it's supposed to do." But when we were over there, it wasn't doing it. Is the coolest, weirdest, and dangest thing I've ever seen in my life.
It kind of reminds me of some of the stuff they report seeing over like Skinwalker Ranch, what some people have called lightning balls, but that's how they describe them because they're so weird. There's just these they're almost like plasma, and they're just, they float all around, and it's just bizarre looking.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was. It was it's weird. I'm open-minded. I'm not skeptical about anything. Heck, I was out there looking for Bigfoot and Dogman. But I had never seen anything like that before. I think I may have seen orbs at LBL before. I'm not 100% sure. I'm still like, that might have just been, my eyes adjusting to the dark. But this was every single one of us was seeing the same thing. You could hear people describing which way it was moving, and it was moving the same way. So I'm like, okay, I'm not imagining this. Because one guy was like, "Is it an optical illusion?" I said, "That we're all seeing moving the exact same way?" He said, "Okay, good point taken."
in your 30 years as an officer, have you got a chance to speak to other officers about their weird experiences, or do they just kind of like not talk about it?
Yeah, more so some more about the UFO stuff. Now I've got some officers that are friends that believe that Bigfoot is real. They haven't had any kind of encounters or anything like that, but they do believe that they're real. And honestly, my book has really kind of bridged the gap between. I didn't think that there was as many of my fellow officers around the area that I work with that would get the book and love it and read it. And for a long time, I was, oh, you're crazy. Last department I worked at, they actually looked me in the eye and said, they believe in aliens, but how could I believe in Bigfoot? I'm like, how can you sit there and say you believe in aliens, but you don't believe in Bigfoot? Or it's impossible for Bigfoot to exist. I mean, you can't, that is like, if you believe in this, then this is definitely possible. You know, that's like, I believe in Bigfoot. I've never seen aliens, but if Bigfoot's real, and so can aliens be. But I would see more so on the lines of, I can believe in Bigfoot, but not believe in aliens more than I can say I can believe in aliens and not believe in Bigfoot. It don't cross that way in my head for some reason.
Have you ever got a chance to listen to the 1990 Kitsap County 911 call?
Is that the one in the, oh, he's 6'7"? Oh, he's huge.
Yeah. And the operator's like, uh-oh. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that one many times. I don't know. Just send somebody.
Yeah. Come to find out that like in 96, Ron Moorhead and Peter Byrne, like they kind of popularized it by kind of like investigating it. And I guess they had the chance to like interview the guy, but you know, just I think due to the nature of it, I think he requested to keep his anonymity, which, you know, makes sense. The moral of the story is that, you know, like Moorhead and Byrne were both like, it was genuine, you know, it wasn't some staged thing. I can't imagine calling 911, wasting your time, wasting their time, faking a performance for what?
And that's a question people love to ask me in DA. Have you ever gone on a call about Bigfoot? And I always say, I don't know, because, you know, most people are not going to call 911 and say, hey, I got Bigfoot in my yard. But I can say that I've been on hundreds and hundreds of prowler calls. And I'm going to tell you, that guy's good because he's always gone by the time I get there. I've never been able to catch this guy. But you get there and you're like, okay, what'd you say? Oh, I saw something going through the wood or through the backyard. Or I saw somebody through the window. What can you describe them? I just I saw something through the window. They want us out there. They want us to check this out. And I think they saw something more than what they're saying, but they're not going to say, yeah, it was like 8.5, 9 feet tall, covered in fur, because they're going to think, oh, the cops are going to think I'm stupid. They're going to think I'm crazy. They're going to think I'm on something. So I would say probably a lot of those prowler calls were not human prowlers.
I mean, you think that stigma is still very much around. I mean, I think a lot of people, if they saw something like that, they wouldn't know what to say to a 911 operator. Yeah. You know, like that's kind of.
I was going to say, even the one you're talking about. I mean, he didn't out and out say. He was like, he's big. He's 6'7". I don't know. He was like a basketball player or something. He knew he was not looking at something that was normal, but he was trying to normalize it and rationalize it in his mind and make it make sense to himself and that dispatcher.
I've always wondered, because you'll hear stories and stuff about people who've like worked in law enforcement, and like there's like a supposed like cryptid file, or like they call it a black file, you know, and it's like you're kind of like sworn to secrecy.
They wouldn't swear me to secrecy on that because they know I wouldn't be able to keep my mouth shut about something like that. Maybe for around places like, you know, in your area where that's a hotbed, so to speak, but nothing around here that I've ever heard about or anything like that. You know, my chief retired from ATF, so he's been all over the place. This is the coolest chief I've ever worked for because, you know, he's never given me any kind of crap for believing this and for writing the books. He's always like, hey, good job. I keep it up. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. You know, if anybody would know something like that, it would probably blew the lid off of it, because Chief can't keep his mouth shut either. That's why we get along so good. I think if he'd ever heard anything like that, that's probably a story he would have already told me. So, because he loves telling stories about stuff. Because actually, you remember all the alien stuff in Florida, the house with the something with the power poles, and it's one of the kid that was out there with us on that one. I said something about it. I said, the big alien story in Florida. He was like, oh yeah. And he started rattling all of it off. I'm like, yeah, that's it. I said, my chief actually lived in that house. He goes, are you serious? I'm like, yeah. I can't remember all the ins and outs of it. Chief told me one time, I'm, oh man, that's cool, Chief. But I mean, like I said there again, I just don't, the alien and the ghosts and all that stuff just doesn't pique my interest. Like even seeing what I saw that day, I'm not, that's cool, but I want to go back out and look for Bigfoot again, Dogman, stuff like that. That's what gets me.
What'd you think of the Miami incident last year in January? That was wild, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, the at the mall. What was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what to think about that one, because part of me wants to think that it's a product of the time we're living in with some of us, but some part of me is like, yeah, but I can't explain this. I can't explain that. So
yeah, a lot of people are going to have varying opinions, of course. And from what I saw is there was obviously a narrative that they're like, you know what, this is what we're going to go with. And then there's what happened. As far as what happened, I don't know. I'm not going to speak about it because I'm not educated on it, but it sounds like, I'll just put it this way. It sounds like there were beings that were spotted by multiple people. What they looked like, how many, where they came from, I don't know. But you kind of start going through like Instagram and TikTok and like kind of just like the raw, okay, one video, whatever, right? But there's like, oh, there's 3, oh, there's 10, oh, there's like, oh, there's quite a few, oh, wow, there's quite a few people who are all corroborating, right? But because of the nature of what it is, right, it's not going to be publicized to like a major degree. It's just going to be kind of buried. The timing of it's really interesting. I think you and I and D have spoken about sleight of hand and smoke screens. I wonder if there's a timing incident of that. Interesting.
They don't want you to know or watch what's going on over here.
Look at distraction.
Look over here. Look here. Don't look over here.
Do you remember when they made the whole Johnny Depp Amber Heard like court case? Like, why? But there has to be where they're making decisions of like, okay, like we're going to really focus on this. And of course, I can go down the rabbit hole of like, oh, well, who owns all the who owns all the news? And you look at BlackRock, and that's a whole other thing. That's a huge deep dive. But it really makes me wonder. I'm like, what were they doing? Like, why? Well, I mean, I know why they chose to make that the thing, but yeah, what was going on? What chess pieces were they moving around?
That's, to me, that's scarier than what was actually happening. And I talked about that, or we talked about this plenty of times before, and I made the comment one time, and DA's like, you know what? That is amazing. Think about technology-wise where we were from the end, let's say, of the Civil War to the beginning of World War I, to where we are from the end of World War I to now. Think about the technological jump. I don't think we should be where we're at right now. I was alive when video games were nothing but boop, 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 to what we've got now. That you can't, sometimes you can't tell a real person saying this or computer generated video. I mean, that's I'm 50. That's in less than 30, 40 years that video games have gone that way. I mean, there's more computing power in this than what put us on the moon. Something upped our technological game. And I don't think it was just us, because we definitely are not getting smarter. I know that probably hurts some feelings, but it's the truth, and I use that analogy too. You remember those cassette tapes when you make your mixtapes and all that stuff, and then somebody goes, oh man, that's cool, I want to copy that, and you make them a copy, and then they make a copy for their friends off of that copy, and then you make copies of copies of copies. What happens to them over time? Yeah, they get worse. We're copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. We're getting dumber. I'm sorry, that's why we can't reconstruct how they did the pyramids, and we can't figure out how they did the pyramids and things like that, because we're not as smart as they were back then. I'm sorry that hurts your feelings, but I'm a realist, and that's just the way it is. We're not as, for what we did. If we didn't have the computers and the things that we had, we would not be able to do the stuff that we do now. It's got nothing to do with us being smarter than they were. It's the fact that we have these computers that can do all the computations and line everything up for us. I mean, they figured that stuff out without that stuff. To me, that is the amazing thing. You're figuring out how to cut and move and place them stones without some supercomputer and big machinery figuring it out for you. How you cripple this generation, put them in a room with a remote control and write how to use it on cursive or in cursive writing, and then give them a set of keys. When they get out, it's a straight drive, and they're screwed because schools, and I know I work in a school every day, they don't teach cursive writing anymore. Tell me the last time you found or saw, we're so reliant on computers and things like that. It's just,
I definitely think it's going to be a downfall because you think about it, AI and computers are getting so good that especially in the next 5 years, I mean, you just look at the advancements and things that are happening, you're going to see critical thinking go right out the window more so than it has. I mean, which is saying a lot when I could just ask it a question and it could like analyze and deep dive. And it's like, oh, well, here's a pro, here's a con here, that's just one piece, the whole puzzle. But it is interesting how we have exploded technologically in the last, 100 years alone. For the people who are like, in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, I can't even imagine like what they've seen in their life to go from the 50s and like, the civil rights movement to like where it is now.
Looking at that, just the time that I've been in law enforcement, when I first started in law enforcement, you had to handwrite everything, tickets, reports, statements, all this stuff. Now all that stuff's on computer. I mean, I am the second oldest one at my department, my chief, and then me. And then now my other buddy came back, the gap's a little bit closer. But before he just came back, the next closest one to me, the gap was almost 20 years. I was 20 years older than the next closest one to me. So Chief and I were the only two that had ever handwritten reports until John came back. Now there's three of us that are currently at the department who were in law enforcement when you still had to handwrite everything. Hey, some of these kids were, I mean, to put it in perspective, my staff sergeant, when I graduated the police academy, he was 3 years old, and he's my staff sergeant. He was 3 years old when I graduated the academy to actually be a police officer. They are so reliant on these computers that you hand them a ticket book and say, here, write a ticket. And they're like, what do you mean? Write it. I don't know how to write a ticket. It's the same information you're typing in your computer. You just got to write it instead of type it. 30 years, just the technology that has jumped. There was no such thing as a computer that you could roll fingerprints on. You had to manually roll your fingerprints. Now the sheriff's office, they got that thing that you roll across that screen, and the screen reads your fingerprint. No ink, no nothing, and it takes your fingerprints. And I'm like, that stuff like that blows my mind. I'm like, okay, cool.
We're in this day and age where like everybody has to constantly be entertained. We have to constantly have stimulation. And this is something I've experienced as I've kind of gotten older. And I was telling my wife this, it's pretty funny. I'm like, when you're like younger and a kid, you get bored really easily, right? You always gotta have something going on. But like, when you get older, and I know I'm not old, but just, as I'm getting older, I could sit on the couch and just stare at the wall and just like to get lost in my thoughts. Like, I don't really experience that boredom. I'm just like, oh, like this is really peaceful. It's really, you just are kind of, you get lost in your thoughts. You're like, huh. You don't need to have something going on all the time. Like the simplicity of like just easy going, slow. That's nice, right? It's healthy, right? We weren't designed to have these things in our face. We were never designed for that. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a strange time, man. It really is.
It's as far back now to the 70s as it was from the 70s to World War II, I think. When you start putting stuff like that in perspective, I was born in 74. I was closer to World War II in 74, or as close to World War II in 74 as I am now to a normal time when there was no war going on. And it's weird when you start looking at stuff in perspective, how long and how much has changed in that. And going back to the Bigfoot thing, I mean, granted, technology has helped that out and helped us out and helped us give a space for people who don't have to be bullied or, ridiculed and stuff like that. And that's great for that, but it's also giving people a way to bully people. And a great example of that is, being a school resource officer. When I was in school, if you got mad at somebody towards the end of school over the summer, you forgot about it. You come back and you're like, was we mad at each other? I don't remember. Well, probably not. Now they're constantly connected with each other, and they'll keep it going the entire summer unless they played the same sport that I did. I didn't know anybody that went to a different school. Now, I mean, they know people that go to school down in the lower part of the state, and they've got a beef with each other, but because of social media. Social media is the worst thing ever, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to being a school resource officer at an elementary school. Me and the principal the other day had to have a discussion with elementary school girls about putting stuff on TikTok, making threats to people in elementary school.
This is a discussion my wife and I had where we're like, and I know people are going to disagree, but why do children need cell phones? Like, you're a kid. Play with your toys and go play with sticks. Like that's what you're supposed to do. Like that. Yeah. They're just, I don't like it. My kids, I'm like, no, you're not going to have it for a long time. Like, I want you to, you need to spend time here in the world, like face to face, eye contact. It's one of those things, man. But you know what? I know our time together is limited. I want to respect your time. So I got two last good questions for you. If you had to convince someone who's skeptical, what would you say?
Well, that's a good one. I'd say, okay, I'm going to draw this circle on this piece of paper. Let's just say the circle's 6 inches in diameter. And this circle represents everything in the known universe. Everything. Every bit of knowledge, everything that exists, everything is inside this circle. And I want to give you this pencil, and I want you to make a circle inside this circle of how much you know in correlation with this circle. How big of a circle would that be? Most people are like, barely even, it would barely even register, right? Maybe it looked like a little microscopic dot, not even a circle to the naked eye. Okay. So if that little bit represents what you know, and all this stuff out here represents the stuff that you don't know, how can you say that something like Bigfoot or Dogman or even God or any aliens or anything like that exists outside or doesn't exist outside of what you know? You know what? Never thought about it that way. And at least that opens up. It's not so putting it in their face of, well, you're stupid because this, and it's like, okay, you tell me how much you know. If this represents everything, how much do you know in correlation to that? And let them make that, because obviously if they say, well, that right there, oh, you know everything, you're not going to win that argument anyway. If they're honest with themselves and they make the small circle, okay, fair enough. So how can you say that all this area that is outside or represents outside of what you know, how can you say that something like that doesn't exist if you don't know any of the rest of this stuff? You're not attacking them. You're allowing them to say, okay, this is what I know based on all this. Okay, well then, based on what you just said, there's a whole lot there that you don't know, right? Well, yeah. Okay, so it's a possibility that something like this could exist outside of the realm of your knowledge, right? Yeah, I guess you're right.
If this exists, how come, and of course I have my own answers, if this exists, how come there's no bodies, there is no reputable footage or photographs?
Okay, well, let's break this. I've been in the woods my entire life. I know bears exist. I've never seen a bear skeleton in the woods, but I know bears exist. Things like porcupines, just weather and time breaks bones down. I mean, nature is cruel and harsh, and it'll get rid of bones. And that's just if these things are just left out there. But what if they are sort of sentient, really smart, and they live underground and they drag their dead underground? It's not out of the realm of possibility. Less than 2% of the world's cave systems, or the U.S.'s cave systems, have been explored. The Mammoth Cave goes, they believe, from Maine to New Mexico, and only 2% of that cave system has been explored. So how much is down there that we don't know about? Because, exploring caves is not like exploring anywhere else. That takes a concerted effort because you have to put stuff in, and you have to constantly have a supply chain moving to move stuff further and further ahead as you're moving further and further ahead. So it's not like me and you could just throw a backpack on and go explore. There's just no way to do that. So we don't know what's down there. Could be a grave down there that is further past anything than anybody's ever been to.
The big one, I think, for a lot of people, and I understand, their complaint is that there's just not good footage or there's not good photographs. And
I guess you know where I'm going with the footage and the photograph. Nobody has ever, even though there's people who said that, nobody has ever debunked Patterson-Gimlin footage. Nobody. The more that footage is scrutinized, the better it stands up. The guy who made the suits for Planet of the Apes said, if we'd have had the technology to make that kind of suit back then, that's what you would have seen on the screen versus what we saw Roddy McDowell dressed up like in Planet of the Apes. And he was the lead guy then. I love Rick Baker to death. God rest his soul. Or not Rick Baker, Stan Winston. Love him to death, but he was like, oh, that was a cheap made suit. And that's why I said Rick Baker, because Rick Baker made suit for American Werewolf in London, and was the one that went back and did the new Benicio del Toro Wolfman movie. The only person who's ever won 2 Academy Awards for horror movie makeup is Rick Baker. I believe the man knows what he's talking about. He has said that there was not the technology did not exist back then to make a suit like that. You got people like that. They're saying that. You got people like Dr. Meldrum and Grover Clance and who else has said it? I think Ron Moorhead's weighed in on it. Peter Burns weighed in on it, and they've all said, and Grover Clance and Jeff Meldrum by themselves, the stuff that they know about, primate locomotion and foot morphology and all that kind of smart stuff that I don't know anything about. If they say that that's primate locomotion, who am I to argue with it? Who are any of these other people out here, these little yahoos that don't even have those degrees, that say, oh no, that's a guy in a suit. I mean, you see muscle moving underneath the skin. That's not a suit. It's never been debunked. To me, that's the best film footage. I'm sure you probably feel the same way. I know it's hard to play devil's advocate on something you believe in. I know I've had to do it.
Yeah.
And this guy, I can't remember the guy's name, but there's a guy who's remastering it, retooling it, refilm or reworking all the film. I watched a couple of the outtake videos that he's released, man, and we actually did a whole show on it. There's actually, if you look, there's like from underneath her arm, like right here, and it kind of goes back. It's almost like it's a worn spot. So me and DA was looking at that, and we started talking, and obviously Patty's a female. We got looking at it. If you were carrying a baby on your hip and it was holding on, that it was a perfect spot for where a kid's arm would be hanging on, and it for all that time, and it wore the fur down. And when he remade all that video, you can actually see it was like when she swings her arm up, you can just see it, how it perfectly aligns with how if he was holding on from the back, it just perfectly aligns from where an arm would be. You don't make that kind of detail in a suit when you're making a suit. And then there's the famous video where Bob Hieronymus remade the suit. He's got the black eye paint under his eyes. He got the goofy guy with a little chauffeur's cap on, holding the. It is hilarious to watch. I don't know if you've seen that whole video or not. It is funny. It is hilarious. He's kind of got the movement down with the arm swinging, but when you see a side by side of Patty and him, it's just comical. I can't describe it any other way. It's comical to watch how fluid her movements is and how rehearsed to try to be exactly like Patty's his movement. And this is supposedly that it was the same guy. I mean, you can tell it's totally different. You can tell one is just the natural movement of a live creature. Another one is a guy who's trying to mimic that. He's watched the video and practiced it and went out and practiced and tried to get as good with it. But his body is just not the same.
Also, the detail of her face, dude. No one talks about that. Like you can clearly like the oh my gosh, not even just the facial structure, but the bridge nose, like the lips even. Well, I mean, it's like, yeah.
If you look, me and Jesus were talking about it, Jesus Payon, we were down at, I can't remember what conference we were at, but they had just started doing all that kind of stuff. So he was really getting into that stuff. And he brings up some pictures on his phone, and there's like scar tissue on her lip right here. And almost like, he said it's almost like a tattoo type, because he's does tattoos. What else does he do? He's a stuntman, actor, physiologist, archaeologist. I mean, Jesus does everything. But he said it's almost like scarring from a tattoo. So he was almost like, I wonder if that's something that they do as a clan, almost like a cold brand or something like that. Because he said that's what the scar tissue, and I can't remember if it was like on the outside of her arm or wherever it was. He showed it to me. He's like that scar tissue. That's what that looks like, is scarring tissue from what a tattoo would do. So it's interesting when you start looking at that after the things get enhanced, and it's just stuff that they're not going to make on a suit.
For anyone who's had an unexplainable, I don't want to say encounter, but for anyone who has had an unexplainable event happen in their life, what's your single most crucial piece of advice to that person?
I would say don't be afraid to talk to somebody about it, because there's somewhere, like whether it be on our show or somebody else's show, or sending in emails to people like you and Cam who allow people to do that. Tell somebody about it, because coming from somebody who held it in for 40 years, it feels good to talk about it. It feels good to talk about it. Either just, even if you just write it out and you don't send it off to somebody, just putting it on paper will make you feel better about it. And it'll also help you remember stuff. Because when I sat down and wrote my encounter out for DA, that was the first time that I had ever really, I had told people that I'd seen Bigfoot before that, but I didn't go into any detail about the story. People were just like, "Oh, you believe in Bigfoot?" I'm like, "Yeah, I saw one." "Oh, well, what happened?" Well, I saw one when I was a kid at my great grandparents' house, and that's about as far into it as I would go, because I was already going to be ridiculed at that point anyway. Why go into the great details of it? But actually writing it out for DA for his show the first time was the first time that I'd actually, from start to finish, told the story in a long time, and it felt so good. And then when I was scared to death to do it, but when I actually got on the show and said it for the first time, it was just like, wow, that felt so much better. And I didn't even realize that was something that I needed to do, because, like I said, the hard-headed cop, compartmentalizing everything, just pack it down and deal with it that way. That's how I dealt with it, the same way I dealt with everything else in my job. And, just being able to get that out and talk about it was cleansing. I hate to use that term, but that's what it felt like. It was just like, whew, I feel better now. No matter what you saw, no matter what you think you saw, whatever, talk to somebody about it, because there's somebody out there who's willing to listen to you about it. Me, DA, Doc, you, Cam. There's plenty of people now that are not going to ridicule you. They're just going to listen to you and let you get your story out. Past anything else, that's my biggest advice to somebody, is just don't hold it inside. Don't sit on the information. Don't sit on what you've seen or everything. Get it out to somebody. And I'm not saying, we got to get, I'm just saying for yourself, talk about it. And if talking about it is just writing it down on a piece of paper and never showing anybody else, that's going to help. Well, you can catch us every Wednesday and Saturday night at 8 p.m. Central Time. I always get confused because I'm in Eastern Time. But 8 p.m. Central Time on YouTube, DA Ex Machina. Me, DA, for the most part. Sometimes Steve's on there, sometimes Doc's on there. They both got crazy work schedules. This guy here has been on there a couple times. We've had Cam Buckner on there. We've had Dr. Meldrum on there. Ron Moorhead's been on there. MK Davis. We've had Doug Hychek from Monster Quest has been on. So yeah, pretty cool show. Last week or Wednesday night we talked about all these mysterious bear attacks that are going on in Florida. I'm wondering if there's more of a cryptid, bear attacks.
They're bear attacks, right? We got a lot of vicious bears in Florida.
Yeah, they've already killed 3 bears. Even though they were miles away from where the attack happened, they've already killed 3 bears. Haven't done the necropsy or the autopsy on the guy yet, but they've killed 3 bears. So anyway, and if you want to check my books out, they're on Amazon. Just look up Robbie Rains books or Robbie Jed Rains. The 2 that I have out now, the first one is Shadow Walker's Silver Star. That's book 1, and then Shadow Walker's book 2. The Creature of Skateboard Swamp, and I am 8 chapters into book 3 right now, so it should be out in the next couple months or so. Like I said, if you've seen anything, talk to somebody. If you want to talk to us on DA Ex Machina, we're pretty easy to find. Talk to Josh, talk to Cam, talk to somebody. Just getting your story out there and getting it off your chest, even if you don't want your name out there. That's fine. That's understandable, because, I've been there. I've lived that 40 years of, ridicule. Oh, you're crazy. He's a crazy Bigfoot cop. thinking of, well, if people start thinking this, then, there goes my credibility as a police officer. But nowadays I'm number one, I'm too old to even care or worry about that anymore. I'm at the twilight of my career, so I don't care if people label me crazy. I'm going to say what I'm going to say, but don't go through life and be that way because you don't have to. Because there's somebody out there that wants to listen to you and wants to hear your story. So let them know. Other than that, just like he said earlier, get out in the woods, get outside. Don't sit inside and let stuff like that go by, because you never know what you could be missing. Because if I was been sitting inside, I wouldn't have seen that 2.5 hours of that thing flying around, which still to this day, I'm just like, I can't believe that I saw that. I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have DA and Doc as my two best friends now, because if I was too afraid to go out and get out and do stuff, I wouldn't be going and driving to Missouri 12.5 hours every time I go. And I make quite a few trips to Missouri, and just get out and experience stuff, do stuff. I mean, I never did stuff like this when my kids were still living here. And I because I had to raise them. I had to make sure that I was here for them. But as soon as they were out on their own and I started doing this stuff, I mean, I've been to Texas, I've been to Missouri, I've been to Ohio, I've been to Arkansas, I've been to Alabama, I've been all over the East Coast doing this kind of stuff. And it's fun doing the stuff that I'm doing, but it's fun to just go play. You don't have to go out and go Bigfooting or whatever. Just get out and experience the world. Like we said, the situational awareness. Go out and learn a new skill, learn a trade, I went to a tracking class, and that opened up a whole new world for me in cryptozoology. I mean, I've gone and taught classes in Ohio, Missouri, Texas, but you just got to get out and do stuff.